Hello, I'm Kaiser and welcome to Moose Reads. Before I get started, I want to say that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I dislike a book, it is not a reflection on the author, and it is not a reflection on people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Those of you keeping an eye on this channel may have noted a sudden lull in my posting schedule. This is because I left for vacation on June 14th and promptly got quite sick. Not only could I not record any videos, I mostly stopped reading. My combined page count for June and July is about the same as any other single month so far this year. So I figured I'd just do both wrap-ups now and then post entirely too many videos in August. I considered just skipping June altogether, but I read 2 of the Expanse books in that time and the 3rd Farseer book, so that didn't seem quite right. So here we are. Let's start with June. In June, I read 6 books and DNF'd 1 book. Excluding the DNF, they totaled 2,309 pages, with an average of 385 pages per book and 77 pages per day. Full reviews for all of the books will be posted over the first half of August. There should be chapters marked so you can easily skip around. First up in June was Persepolis Rising by James S.A. Corey. This is the 7th book in The Expanse. It is a sci-fi novel. The description says, "An old enemy returns. In the thousand-sun network of humanity's expansion, new colony worlds are struggling to find their way. Every new planet lives on a knife edge between collapse and wonder, and the crew of the aging gunship Rocinante have their hands more than full keeping the fragile peace. In the vast space between Earth and Jupiter, the inner planets and belt have formed a tentative and uncertain alliance still haunted by a history of wars and prejudices. On the lost colony world of Laconia, a hidden enemy has a new vision for all of humanity and the power to enforce it. New technologies clash with the old as the history of human conflict returns to its ancient patterns of war and subjugation. But human nature is not the only enemy, and the forces being unleashed have their own price. A price that will change the shape of humanity, and of the Rocinante, unexpectedly and forever." 5 stars. This book starts with a 30-year time skip, which was rather jarring. We also get introduced to the Laconians, the faction that broke away from Mars and escaped through the gates using Marco and the Free Navy as cover. They are the worst people imaginable, which isn't great, because they're about to launch a campaign to take over the universe. I wasn't as crazy about this book. It mostly takes place on Medina, which is the first place the Laconians target, since controlling it means controlling every solar system save our own. It's every bit as well written as the other books in this series. I just didn't love the conquering assholes plotline. The Laconians are absolutely the worst human beings imaginable, which we establish very clearly very early. Because I hate them, I don't want them to succeed, so every victory they have in this book annoyed me. Given that their arrival comes like a sucker punch, they have a fair number of victories too. It was fine overall, but I was glad to be done with it. Then the library gods smiled upon me, and I immediately got to read Tiamat's Wrath by James S.A. Corey. This is the 8th book in The Expanse. It is also a sci-fi novel. The description says, 1,300 gates have opened to solar systems around the galaxy. But as humanity builds its interstellar empire in the alien ruins, the mysteries and threats grow deeper. In the dead systems where gates lead to stranger things than alien planets, Elvi Okoye begins a desperate search to discover the nature of a genocide that happened before the first human beings existed, and to find weapons to fight a war against forces at the edge of the imaginable. But the price of that knowledge may be higher than she can pay. At the heart of the Empire, Teresa Duarte prepares to take on the burden of her father's godlike ambition. The sociopathic scientist Paolo Cortazar and the Mephistophelian prisoner James Holden are only 2 of the dangers in a place thick with intrigue, but Teresa has a mind of her own and secrets even her father, the Emperor, doesn't guess. And throughout the wide human empire, the scattered crew of the Rocinante fights a brave rearguard action against Duarte's authoritarian regime. Memory of the old order falls away, and a future under Laconia's eternal rule, and with it a battle that humanity can only lose, seems more and more certain. because against the terrors that lie between worlds, courage and ambition will not be enough. 5 stars. Now, this one was my favorite, I think. With most of these books, they're fine, I like them, but then I hit somewhere between the 60 and 80% mark, and I don't want to put them down. Tiamat's Wrath started with me feeling that way, and pretty much kept it up the entire time. Every moment of this book is just a question of what horrible thing is going to happen next. Largely this is because Duarte, the new ruler of the universe, having learned about the aliens that wiped out the aliens that were insanely more advanced than humans, has decided to pick a fight with them. I don't know why he thinks he can win that fight, but that's the trouble with megalomaniacs, I guess. Sadly, I had to wait on Leviathan Falls, and only got a quarter of the way through before I got sick and stopped reading, so that's still in the works. Instead, my third book was Roman Canisters by Adrian Fridge. This is a sci-fi romance novella. The description says, Dr. Eugene Waters is the engineer on board the first trip to settle Mars. The success of the mission is jeopardized when his ship is hijacked by an alien station. Thus, the future of mankind is questioned, as is the future of Waters' sex life. 2 stars. Look, I picked this up for free years ago with an attitude of, let's see, it might surprise me. It did not surprise me. I'm pretty sure it says that this was written for a prompt and it's more or less smut for smut's sake. That's fine, except I like the loose threads of plot to make me care about the people engaging in this smut, and this just didn't manage. Both characters were just super horny for each other from the get-go without much explanation as to why. I found Waters to be mostly annoying, and the alien, whose name I forget, to be so bland he hardly counts as a character. Also, the bullshit science tossed out to make the premise work was painfully stupid, and I say that as a person who never enjoyed science and is therefore extremely ignorant of most of it. Fourth up was His Birthday Wish by L. Waters. This is a romance novella, the description says. All Jake Crane wants for his birthday is for something to change. He's not expecting the change to come in the form of an incredibly handsome man showing up at his door out of the blue. He doesn't know the 6 feet of gorgeous standing on his welcome mat. Or does he? After struggling to recover from the death of his father, it turns out good things do sometimes happen to good people. On the most awesome birthday of his life, Jake discovers friendship, love, and that the best kind of happily ever afters are the ones you make for yourself. 3 stars. This book was fine. It was cute and inoffensive. The description doesn't say, but Jake assumes the stranger on his porch is the sex worker that his friend hired so he could lose his virginity for his birthday. To the reader, it's painfully obvious that it's actually his internet BFF who he's been crushing on for a while. It takes a lot longer than it should have to clear up the misunderstanding, but that's fairly par for the course given the setup. Otherwise, it was fairly predictable, low stakes, and nice enough if you just want to kill a few hours reading fluff. Then my brother and I finished listening to Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is the 3rd book in the Farseer trilogy. It is a fantasy novel. The description says, King Shrewd is dead at the hands of his son Regal, as is Fitz, or so his enemies and friends believe. But with the help of his allies and his beast magic, he emerges from the grave, deeply scarred in body and soul. The kingdom also teeters toward ruin. Regal has plundered and abandoned the capital, while the rightful heir, Prince Verity, is lost to his mad quest, perhaps to death. Only Verity's return, or the heir his princess carries, can save the 6 duchies. But Fitz will not wait. Driven by loss and bitter memories, he undertakes a quest to kill Regal. The journey casts him into deep waters as he discovers wild currents of magic within him, currents that will either drown him or make him something more than he was. 3 stars. Look, I know these books are widely loved. They're generally pretty well written, but I hate Fitz. He's whiny and an idiot and so proud that he thinks any idea that isn't his must be a bad one. The more time I spent with him, the more I disliked him. My brother felt more or less the same, so we're quitting the Fitz along. This book in particular also took a hit because I felt like there were several things that kept being repeated in a way that felt heavy-handed and obnoxious. There are 2 separate chapters that start out by explaining that this one country has slaves, and they're only supposed to get them in a specific way, but everyone knows they get them however they want. I don't remember the specifics because it's been a month and I didn't enjoy the book, so I'm not holding it firm in my memory. I think the slaves are only supposed to be prisoners of war. At any rate, it was information that didn't really need to be spoon-fed to the reader once, let alone twice, and it wasn't the only instance of that happening. Also, I hate the dragons in this series, which is a real shame because I generally love dragons. The last thing I finished was The Alpha and His Ace by Anna J. Phoenix. This is a paranormal romance novella. The description says, young, handsome, and the alpha of his wolf pack, Brandon has never had trouble finding men to have sex with. Only one thing is missing, his mate. Brandon can't find him, and the rest of his pack is growing concerned about his lack of partner. An alpha needs a strong partner. Things seem to be looking up when he finally finds his fated companion in Aiden. One problem. Aiden's asexual, and Brandon's now confused. Who doesn't want sex? Aiden, that's who. And Brandon hasn't got a clue how to make someone love him without it. It's going to take some serious self-examination, acceptance, and some really good cake for Brandon to make his way into Aiden's heart. 2 stars. It was fine. It left me feeling disappointed, but that's not entirely its fault. See, the thing is, I love werewolf romance. The trouble is that the het stuff tends to have relationship dynamics that make me uncomfortable, and with the queer stuff, there's pretty much always a 70% chance it'll have mpreg, which I do not enjoy. So I don't read any of it. This book seemed like a great opportunity. Queer werewolf romance, ace rep, no sex, so no pregnancy. But it really wasn't what I wanted going in. See, despite it sounding to me like Aiden was sex repulsed based on the description, he's not. There still isn't mpreg, but it kind of sucks going into a book hoping to feel represented and then having the rug pulled from under you. Mostly, this novella felt like a primer on asexuality, which is fine, but I'm familiar with the concept, so it had that uncomfortable feeling of having someone explain something to you that you may well know more about than them. Not its fault, really. Like I said, it was fine, it just wasn't for me. Needless to say, I won't be reading the sequel. Then I attempted to read Forever Yours, Kit by Atreus Rosewood. This is a romance novella, the description says. Growing up in the 80s, Kit and I were thick as thieves. I thought it couldn't get any better until that one magical night. Then my father found out. Terrified of what he'd do to us, I cut Kit off without a word, and shattered both our hearts in the process. I spent 10 years drowning my sorrows and regretting that choice, knowing he'll never forgive me. How can he, when I'm incapable of forgiving myself? Until Kit suddenly shows up at my door and forces me to confront my demons. Even better, he seems willing to forgive and forget. Suddenly, a second chance is within my grasp. But how can I seize it when I'm more terrified than ever of hurting him? How do I tell the man I hurt so badly 10 years ago that I have loved him all this time? Yeah, I DNF'd this. It's not good. It starts off with dual timelines, which I wasn't expecting. In one, we are reading letters Ryan is writing to his one-time crush, Kit. It was never entirely clear to me if he was actually sending these, but I sure hope not. The second timeline is from when they're teens and falling for each other. Ryan is painfully oblivious as a kid, which wasn't great. He's just irritating as an adult. He's more or less destroyed his own life because he can't be with this one guy, and then he whines about how terrible everything is as if it's someone else's fault. I think he actually says it's Kit's fault multiple times. I didn't like him, and by the time Kit showed up, I honestly didn't want them to get together. On top of that, it is very poorly written. There are tons of mistakes in this book that could have been caught with any editing if Rosewood had just bothered to do it. Also, I'm pretty sure Ryan got fired from the same job 3 times. Not that he got fired, got hired, got fired again, just that the author seemed to forget he'd already lost his job and had him get fired again. I absolutely would not recommend reading this. That was it for June. In July, I read 7 books and DNF'd 1 book. Excluding the DNF, they totaled 2,252 pages, with an average of 322 pages per book and 73 pages per day. Full reviews for all of the books should be posted throughout the second half of August. The first book I read in July was The Martian by Andy Weir. This is a sci-fi novel. The description says, 6 days ago, astronaut Mark Watney became one of the first people to walk on Mars. Now, he's sure he'll be the first person to die there. After a dust storm nearly kills him and forces his crew to evacuate while thinking him dead, Mark finds himself stranded and completely alone with no way to even signal Earth that he's alive. And even if he could get word out, his supplies would be gone long before a rescue could arrive. Chances are, though, he won't have time to starve to death. The damaged machinery, unforgiving environment, or plain old human error are much more likely to kill him first. But Mark isn't ready to give up yet. Drawing on his ingenuity, his engineering skills, and a relentless, dogged refusal to quit, he steadfastly confronts one seemingly insurmountable obstacle after the next. Will his resourcefulness be enough to overcome the impossible odds against him? 4 stars. I liked the movie, so I figured I'd check out the book sometime. I actually think Project Hail Mary sounds more interesting, but I wanted to start with The Martian. I figured if I didn't like it, it would have to be a problem with the writing rather than the story, because I already liked the story. Thankfully, I did like it. It's a lot of science, which seems like it should be dull, but Weir manages to write it in a way that is both clear and entertaining. I liked it, I'd read it again, I'll definitely read more of his work in the future. Then I started working my way through my challenge books for July, with The Faerie Girl and Other Tales by Anthea Sharp. This is a collection of 6 short fantasy stories. The description says, delight in the award-winning story The Sea King's Daughter, inspired by The Little Mermaid. Follow the ill-fated adventures of a goblin who falls in love, and take heart in the hope that unlikely heroes can, with a bit of fairy magic, change their own destinies. I DNF'd this. There was nothing wrong with it, really. The writing was fairly good, the first story was interesting enough, and the third probably could have been. The thing is, I just felt deeply apathetic toward the whole thing. I was still struggling to get back into reading, and I figured trying to push through this when I just didn't care was not a good choice. I might give it another try someday. You'll note, however, that I left out the second story in that evaluation. It was fine. It was, as the description said, inspired by The Little Mermaid. The trouble is that it largely felt uninspired. It certainly wasn't a one-for-one retelling of any one version of the story I've encountered before, but it largely felt like it was entirely pieced together from several. Nothing about it felt new. Next, I read Captive Prnce by C.S. Pacat. This is the first book in the Captive Prnce trilogy. It is a fantasy romance, the description says. Daemon is a warrior hero to his people and the rightful heir to the throne of Achielos. But when his half-brother seizes power, Daemon is captured, stripped of his identity, and sent to serve the prince of an enemy nation as a pleasure slave. Beautiful, manipulative, and deadly, his new master, Prince Laurent, epitomizes the worst of the court at Vere. But in the lethal political web of the Varetian court, nothing is as it seems, and when Daemon finds himself caught up in a play for the throne, he must work together with Laurent to survive and save his country. For Daemon, there is just one rule. Never, ever reveal his true identity, because the one man Daemon needs is the one man who has more reason to hate him than anyone else. 4 stars. This book is entirely trigger warnings. Slavery, rape, pedophilia, abuse, just non-stop awful. More than just about any book I've ever read, this is for sure a your mileage may vary kind of story. For me, as long as they aren't real people, it doesn't necessarily bother me. Daemon is in an awful situation and barely escaping some truly terrible things. Laurent is terrible toward Daemon, but otherwise you get a lot of indications that he's not really a bad guy. This series is a true enemies to lovers, but it's worth noting that the romantic relationship doesn't really start forming in the first book. This book is the hardest to get through, though. It honestly is a lot of awful, written very well in an interesting story. I, of course, followed that up with Prnce's Gambit by C.S. Pacat, which is the second book in the Captive Prince trilogy. It is also a fantasy romance. The description says, with their countries on the brink of war, Daemon and his new master, Prince Laurent, must exchange the intrigues of the palace for the sweeping might of the battlefield as they travel to the border to avert a lethal plot. Forced to hide his identity, Daemon finds himself increasingly drawn to the dangerous, charismatic Laurent. But as the fledgling trust between the two men deepens, the truth of secrets from both their pasts is poised to deal them a final, devastating blow. 4 stars. Daemon and Laurent have come to a sort of truce in this book, so there's much less awful happening. I mean, Laurent's uncle is still trying to kill him and steal his throne, and there is still the reveal that I suspect just about everyone guessed in the first book, but hasn't been confirmed, hanging over everything, but that's a fairly standard kind of awful in fantasy. I do think that there is a certain level of suspension of disbelief necessary for the series, but this book in particular. The whole thing is Laurent making moves and counter moves. More than once his plans seem fairly straightforward, and then his uncle throws a wrench into the works, and you find out that he had anticipated this, and his plan was actually something else all along. The degree to which he can predict his uncle's backstabbing methods seems a little uncanny, which then makes it feel weird whenever he falls into one of them. Still, between all the scheming, the relationship is starting to develop. This might be where some people start to feel real uncomfortable about things, because Daemon is still nominally Laurent's slave. However, at pretty much every turn, it's made clear that Daemon could leave at any moment, and his remaining by Laurent's side is a choice he's making. For me, that's sufficient balancing of the scales that I can enjoy their growing feelings. And I followed that up by finishing the series with King's Rising by C.S. Pacat. Again, this is a fantasy romance. The description says, his identity now revealed, Daemon must face his master, Prince Laurent, as Damianos of Achelous, the man Laurent has sworn to kill. On the brink of a momentous battle, the future of both their countries hangs in the balance. In the south, Castor's forces are massing. In the north, the regent's armies are mobilizing for war. Daemon's only hope of reclaiming his throne is to fight together with Laurent against their usurpers. Forced into an uneasy alliance, the two princes journey deep into Achelous, where they face their most dangerous opposition yet. But even if the fragile trust they have built survives the revelation of Daemon's identity, can it stand against the regent's final deadly play for the throne? 4 stars. You find out pretty quickly that despite Daemon agonizing over the inevitable reveal, Laurent has known who he was the entire time, which goes a long way to explaining why he was such an asshole in the first book. Unfortunately, the relationship that was growing takes a step backwards in this one before settling in. I'm not entirely sure why Laurent starts being a brat in this book. Not that it's out of character, but I don't think his reasons are clearly explained. I can guess, though, so maybe that's the point. This book is more high-stakes cheating at chess between Laurent and the regent, but because we've got to up the drama, Laurent starts losing a lot more of their matches. I felt the end of this book was a bit convoluted, and I'm not sure it entirely works, but it's got enough plausibility that I'm okay with it. For my 5th book, my brother and I listened to Wren Martin Ruins It All by Amanda DeWitt. This is a romance novel. The description says, now that Wren Martin is student council president, on a technicality, but hey, it counts, he's going to fix Rapture High. His first order of business, abolish the school's annual Valentine's Day dance, a drain on the school's resources and general social nightmare, especially when you're asexual. His greatest opponent? Leo Reyes, vice president and all-around annoyingly perfect student. Leo has a solution to Wren's budget problem, a sponsorship from Buddy, the anonymous not-dating app, sweeping the nation. Now, instead of a danceless senior year, Wren is in charge of the biggest dance Rapture High has ever seen. He's even secretly signed up for the app, for research, of course. But when Wren develops capital F feelings for his anonymous match, things spiral out of control. Wren decided a long time ago that dating while asexual wasn't worth the hassle. With the big night rapidly approaching, he isn't sure what will kill him first: the dance, his relationship drama, or the growing realization that Leo's perfect life might not be so perfect after all. 4 stars. I didn't actually expect much going into this book. I'm trying to pick at least one audiobook from my brother's collection for us to listen to each month, but I didn't want to start a new series just yet, and this was one of the few standalones. Plus it's got Ace Rep, which I'm here for. It turned out to be a nice surprise. This was what I wanted from the Alpha and his Ace. There were no ham-fisted asexuality 101 lectures, just a boy with romantic feelings who doesn't want sex and doesn't know how to reconcile those two facts. I'm not a boy, of course, but I sure felt seen. That isn't to say the book is without its flaws. It's obvious to the reader from the start who Wren's anonymous buddy is. They each give enough hints throughout that it starts to strain belief that neither of them figures it out. I'm also not entirely sure I liked the resolution to the story. It's the happily ever after you would expect from these sorts of things. It just didn't feel solid? I don't know how to describe it. I felt like there was a conversation that needed to happen to properly settle all the issues the boys had between them, and they didn't actually have that conversation. They met, realized who they'd been messaging the whole time, and everything was fine. After that, or kind of the same time as that, the reason I reread the Captive Prince series was so that I could read the short story collection, The Summer Palace and Other Stories by C.S. Picot. This is not included in the main trilogy, but you do have to read those to read this. Like this trilogy, this is a fantasy romance collection. The description says, follow Damon Laurent and the supporting characters of Captive Prince on a series of adventures set in and around the events of the novels, and beyond, to learn what happens after the final page in the trilogy is turned. 3 stars. There are 4 stories in this, and my feelings on 2 of them are iffy at best. None of them are bad necessarily, it's just that the first story, Green But for a Season, involves the start of a relationship that I know ends badly, alongside a peek into why Laurent's men are so loyal to him. So while I like the second part of that, I don't enjoy the first. The last story, Pet, is about a character I don't care about at all, and while I can't say it was bad, I can't really say I enjoyed it either. The other 2 were great, though. The Summer Palace is Picot shoring up some of the uncertainties in Damon and Laurent's relationship in a way that I liked. You finally get to see the 2 of them being properly together without all the mess between them, and it's nice. The third story, The Adventures of Charles the Venetian Cloth Merchant, was one I didn't expect to like. It's about a character who shows up briefly in the first and third books. It feels like a case of the author writing a throwaway character and accidentally falling in love with them, which is a charming and terrible thing to have happen. I did not fall in love with him, so I thought whatever he got up to would be boring. But what he gets up to is shenanigans involving Laurent and Damon in disguise, and it ended up being an absolute blast. All in all, it could have been better, but I'm glad I read it all the same. If I revisit it in the future, I'll probably just read the 2 stories, though. And lastly, my brother and I listened to The 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers by Adam Sass. This is a romance novel. The description says, Micah is rich, dreamy, and charming. As the Prnce of Chicago, the son of local celebrity sports radio host known as the King of Chicago, he has everything going for him. Unfortunately, he's also the prince of imaginary meet-cutes, since he's too nervous to actually ask boys out. Instead, Micah draws each crush to share on Instagram with a post about their imaginary dates. 99 boyfriends later, his account is hugely popular and everyone is eagerly awaiting Boy 100. So is Micah. He's determined that Boy 100 will be different. This time, Micah will sweep the boy off his feet, for real. So when Micah flirts with a hot boy on the L who's wearing a vegan leather jacket and lugging a ton of library books, he is sure this is Boy 100. But right before he can make his move and ask for the boy's number, the guy rushes off the train, leaving behind his pumpkin-embroidered jacket. The jacket holds clues to the boy's identity, so Micah and his friends set off on a quest to return it. Along the way, Micah will discover that the best relationships aren't fairy tales. In fact, the perfect fit, and true love, might be closer than he thinks. 2 stars. You know those rom-coms where one or the other of the end couple is dating someone already, and they're a complete jackass, so you kind of wonder why they're dating in the first place, but you don't mind knowing they're going to break up? This is sadly not that. In this book, it's very obvious from the beginning that Micah isn't going to finish the book with the boy on the train, but it takes a long time for Micah to figure that out. In the meantime, he starts dating a boy who, while not perfect, is perfectly nice. Overall, the book was fine. I just ended up hating Micah in the 11th hour, and it kind of tanked my enjoyment. I also wasn't crazy about the audiobook narrator, which probably didn't help. And that's all the books I read in July. My current plans for August are as follows. First, I will finish reading Leviathan Falls by James S. A. Corey, which also finishes out the series. Then I will also finish Thousand Autumns by Meng-Ji Shi by reading Volume 5, and also read Volume 4 of Remnants of Filth by Robao Buchiro. I'll read Anne of Windy Poplars for the 2024 challenge as a book with a house on the cover, and follow it up with Anne's House of Dreams so that I can read Anne of Ingleside for a book with water on the cover. All of these are by L.M. Montgomery. I plan to read The Hanging City by Charlie N. Holmberg, because I want to read so many of her books, and this is the only one that seems to be a standalone, which will hopefully give me an idea as to whether I like her writing. My brother and I will be listening to The Extraordinaries by T.J. Klune. Depending on how that goes and time constraints, we may also have a go at the first sequel. Who knows? I'll be listening to Sister Song by Lucy Holland for August's book club book, assuming it comes in from the library, and then I'll read Starlight and Shadows by Vera Winters to get ahead for September's book club. That more or less fills up August, unless I read much quicker than I have planned. Most likely, if I have room for more and I like the first book, I'll probably just keep going in the Starlight Sanctum series. If you like this video, I hope you'll watch more in the future. Thanks for watching this one. Bye!